Welcome to Vantage Point Podcast, a podcast brought to you by NWR Communications and 92 Studio. This podcast is intended for education and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. Hi and welcome back to Vantage Point, where we get behind the leaders who are driving success within the Australian market. We're privileged today to have CEO and Managing Director of Hazer Group, Glenn Corrie. Before I introduce Glenn, I'll just provide a brief overview of Hazer Group. It's founded in 2010 to commercialise technology that was originally developed at the University of Western Australia. The company's underlying Hazer process, which uses natural gas and unprocessed iron ore, creates a low-cost and low-emissions clean hydrogen. Hazer Group recently announced the startup of its commercial demonstration plant and first production of hydrogen and graphite, with a ramp-up of operations expected in the current half. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks. Glenn, thanks very much for joining us today. Obviously, CEO of Hazer Group. Perhaps just before we get started in intimate detail on Hazer, you can just talk to us about your professional background and how you come across Hazer.
Great, thanks Simon, and pleasure to be here. My background, very briefly, I've been about 30 years in the energy sector. I started out my life as a geophysicist, so loved rocks, loved energy, loved oil and gas. I effectively had around 10, 12 years with Shell in global roles, a lot of it in strategy, a lot of it in Asia, a lot of it in the gas world. Did some really interesting stuff for Shell corporately, put together their global gas strategy for the whole company worldwide, which was amazing experience. Kind of got me really engaged in the gas markets, which is partly why I'm kind of here today in respect of Hazer. After Shell, I really had an itch to go and do some other stuff. I went off and did an MBA in the US with Chicago Booth. Came back to Singapore after that and joined the Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund, Temasek, for a number of years and effectively was responsible for growing out their energy investment portfolio, which we grew to around $4 billion over 3 years, which is amazing. Not all those investments were great, as you can imagine in the investment world, but some were stellar, some were average. But generally, an amazing experience. Got the opportunity to meet with pretty much every energy and oil and gas company in the world at that stage. And during that time, renewables, this is back in 2010 to 2013, renewables was just getting really hot. Solar, wind were really interesting investment opportunities, and they were the closest at that stage to grid parity. So we kind of looked at a lot of stuff. We invested in Huaneng Renewables up in China and a whole bunch of other opportunities, gas and LNG powered vehicles in the US. So I really got interested in kind of energy transition stuff back then. After Temasek, I did a short stint in London, worked for a company called Ophir Energy, which was focused on Africa, LNG, big LNG developments in East Africa. And we managed during that time to sell a stake in a very large LNG and gas field to an Asian counterparty for over $1 billion, which is an amazing experience. So it was a really good time in the market. I then moved to China, an amazing experience working in Beijing for a publicly listed company at the time called Sinogas and Energy. That was back in 2013, and between 2013 and 2019, we built it up to be one of a very prominent gas producer in the country, all the way from explorer to gas producer. That attracted interest of a bunch of investors around the world. I think at kind of our pinnacle, we had 50 to 60% of the register high were institutional investors. Amazing. China was hot. Gas markets were amazing at the time. Gas prices were very high. It was a sweet spot for us. Stars were aligning, and in 2019 we got taken private by a very large US private equity group. So it was the end of an era for the company, but an amazing opportunity to go through that. I did a few other things in between. I ran a private equity run energy group in London that acquired some big assets in the North Sea. And then here I am today with Hazer.
And to talk to us about how that came about, because I know the chairman, Tim Goldsmith, talks about basically hunting you down and finding you in London and trying to convince you to come back to Perth. What attracted you to Hazer? and particularly to go back in as a CEO role, your third CEO role?
Well, I was looking for something a bit different, and I initially got the brief for the role, and I kind of looked at it and thought, this has got some. I was actually looking at a few other roles at the time. There was a couple of energy things in private equity, and then I initially got the brief. It might have been probably 6 months before I took the role, and I kind of read it and thought, geez, this has got a really interesting angle to it. Kind of thought it was what I see as kind of a double bottom line company. It's all about, has it got deep value and can that be unlocked? But at the same time, are we doing good things for the planet? So it kind of ticked a lot of boxes for me, very keen to continue that transition. So I kind of looked at it and I thought, God, this is really interesting. I kind of left it for a little bit, was busy doing some stuff in South America. And then I got another call from kind of the company. And they said, look, we'd really be interested in you having a proper look at it. And I kind of did a bit of digging. And it was interesting because one of the first questions I kind of asked was, who are the investors behind it? Always good endorsement to understand who's behind it.
Yep.
And it actually turned out our largest investor was a group out of London called AP Ventures. And when you do a bit of digging on AP Ventures, Andrew Hinckley and the team there are probably the world's most prominent investors in the hydrogen space.
I think it was just late last year, sort of named as number one in the hydrogen investor space.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's a big growing space, and they've deployed a huge amount of capital into the business. And when you dig behind Andrew and the team's fund, you actually see that there's some really strong limited partners supporting kind of the strategy of the fund. The likes of Mitsubishi, Sumitomo, Temasek, Singapore funds, my ex-employer, groups like Equinor, Anglo-American, and they're really sophisticated investors in energy transition and using AP Ventures as a platform to deploy capital behind experts that know what they're doing. So it ticked a big box for me in terms of tech validation. And then I had a discussion with Andrew and the team at AP Ventures, and I got really comfortable with the technology as one of the leading technologies in this space. And that, for me, was, in some respects, the final tipping point.
And so let's get stuck into Hazer, particularly around the technology and the end markets and what you're aiming to solve in terms of the energy transition and ideally making the world a better place. What does technology actually do, and what stage is it at? I know that the commercial CDP, as you call it, was just live. Was it last week?
Last week,
which is a big milestone. 15 years in the making.
Yes.
But take us through the story and the different angles that investors should be aware of.
No, brilliant. So look, firstly, the tech. It's pretty straightforward. Basically, it's a world-first technology. It's the first time that any company has produced clean hydrogen and graphite using pyrolysis, the decomposition of natural gas, using iron ore as a catalyst. As I said, it's a world-first technology. It's been a 15-year journey to get to this point. It started its evolution back in 2007. And it's PhD research out of the University of Western Australia. We went public back in 2015, and of course, it's not been a straight line to kind of get to where we are today. But it's the 5th successful scale-up of the technology. Now, if you think about most technology, they go on a scale-up journey. I'm not sure what the numbers are, but if you go back and look at history, there's few technology companies that make it to the end. I think it's like 2 out of 10 or something is the. So it's a real testament to the underlying technology that we can be here today.
Particularly in the space that you play in.
Especially climate technology is, they're not easy to get off the ground. And I think, as I said, it's a real credit to the research, the technology, and the ongoing kind of discipline and the commitment, passion, and energy and drive behind the team.
Maybe we can sort of step back a bit. I've heard you talk about it's aqua or turquoise hydrogen.
Turquoise,
What are the sort of different markets, and where do you sort of fit within there? And just talk to us about what's the sort of competitive landscape look like as well up against Hazer?
Yeah, so hydrogen's kind of it's a bit of an enigma, if I'm honest. There's lots going on in the space, but
lots of noise.
Lots of noise, and lots of things that can confuse kind of prospective investors in the space as well. But the best way to think about hydrogen is most people don't appreciate today how large the market is. That's the first thing. It's a massive market. It's about 100 million tonnes of scale. Now you might say, well, what does that mean in terms of scale? It's in context, I like to tell folks that it's literally a third of the LNG market. Now that's a better context. It's monstrous. It's LNG market was valued, I think, about 2 years ago at about 150 billion. The hydrogen market today at 100 million tonnes valued at about 180 billion dollars. So it's a third of the size of the global LNG market, but about the same in value. So you can see the importance of it. Where does it get used? Two things mostly. Today, 60% of the hydrogen is used for desulfurizing crude oil. So pretty much every refinery around the world is going to have a hydrogen production facility. The other 40%, bar a little bit, is for ammonia production. So it's a big market. Every refinery around the world will have an SMR plant or a hydrogen production plant. Now, how does all that get produced? It gets produced with quite an old process called steam methane reforming, or SMR, simplified down. And that process is quite simple. It takes natural gas as a feedstock, or methane, and using steam and water, it splits methane molecule, which is CH4, into its natural elements of hydrogen, and it combined with the water, it has a CO2 byproduct. So hydrogen, yes, but huge amounts of CO2. Every ton of hydrogen comes with 11 tons of CO2. So it's more of a CO2 technology than it is a hydrogen technology. Yeah, so it's a massive problem. It's not a sustainable climate solution. Where Hazer can disrupt that existing market is that we use the same feedstock as SMR, steam methane reforming, and gas. And instead of using water, we use heat to decompose the same molecule into pure hydrogen and carbon in the form of graphite. So it's one technology that serves two really important markets, the growing hydrogen market and the critical mineral market through graphite, using iron ore as a catalyst. Our big differentiator relative to everyone else in this space is the use of iron ore as a catalyst. We trickle it into the reactor, and it does one really important serves one really important purpose, and that is to significantly reduce the reaction temperature. Most pyrolysis is done north of 1500, 1800 degrees Celsius. We can transform methane at a temperature of between 800 and 900. So you can see we are half the energy requirement.
And what does that do? Does that reduce the CO2 as well?
Well, zero CO2 in the process, so that's a big tick to provide the same result. And we can do it at a much lower cost. So we're very low on arguably the lowest on the cost curve.
And in terms of IP around that, and you talk about the iron catalyst and whatnot, how does the sort of IP protection around the process look?
Yeah, very good. So the IP is fundamentally important to the tech. We've been at IP protection for 10, 15 years around it. We've got it's north of 60 patents worldwide. Many of those have been granted in over 32 jurisdictions. So we've got a very solid IP protection strategy. We've got attorneys around the tech. Most of it's across two families: the use of catalyst and iron ore catalyst to produce hydrogen through pyrolysis. When we ring-fenced that, and the second one is our very unique Hazer graphite that comes out, and the purification of that down to lithium-ion battery-grade quality. So we've got IP protection around most of that. There's some improvements that we've done to pyrolysis as well, which we've captured, as well as the trademark. So it's we're very well protected in that respect. We've had 100% success rate of application grants and approvals, and we rarely see any challenges to the IP. So really strong position. Got to keep an eye on the market. Got to keep moving, and ensure that we're kind of ahead of it.
It's critical, obviously. In terms of, I know you talked about sort of cost curve and whatnot. Can you talk about what it looks like on a competitive landscape, versus the traditional sort of hydrogen production, but also your sort of competitors as well, and just talk to the sort of mooted valuations around them, because it's obviously there's no other sort of similar player on the ASX, but just to give us a bit of a benchmark on that.
Absolutely, and in terms of our landscape, we are, as far as we are aware, the only pure play hydrogen technology venture that's listed worldwide in this arena. So we are a really strong investment proxy for anyone that wants to get involved in low cost, low emissions hydrogen production.
Yep.
So that's puts us apart from everyone else. The three ways of getting hydrogen today, we talked about steam methane reforming, almost 100% of the market. We're the disruption to that. Roughly the cost band around SMR is about $2 to $3 a kilogram. That'll depend on the feedstock cost and so forth. The other way of getting there, which you've heard a huge amount about, is electrolysis, commonly called green hydrogen.
Yep.
Lots of developers in this space. Green hydrogen or electrolysis essentially splits a water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen. And pure thermodynamics and chemistry means that the molecular bond of water is 7 times stronger than the molecular bond of methane, so it's 7 times harder to do it, split it. So it's going to be 7 times more energy intensive to effectively produce hydrogen from electrolysis than it is to do what we're doing with methane.
Yep.
So we've got an edge there. Not to say that won't be the case, but that requires a huge amount of energy to do it, a lot of water, and the scale-up potential with renewables is, obviously facing challenges. So we sit in a really unique space relative to green. We sit in a very unique space relative to SMR, because we've got pure hydrogen and graphite, zero CO2, low cost and low emissions. So really unique, and that's starting to get picked up. Frankly speaking, if you go back 18 months in this space, it was really complicated, lots of technologies and lots of
fair bit of fluff as well.
A lot of talk.
Yep.
And I've seen it really neutralise. In that time, we see a lot of green hydrogen projects not necessarily getting to where they need to be, and a huge focus on gas as a transition fuel, and the ability for how can we take that and accelerate the transition to hydrogen, because we can do that much quicker than anybody else.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
And so probably a few things. One, existing partners and sort of equivalents of offtake. How do they sort of look, and what's the sort of real next steps? Obviously, the commercial demonstration plant, live. That's critical. But how does sort of commercialising the platform technology look like?
So CDP online last week, as you mentioned. Massive milestone for us. It's the 5th time we've done it, and it's running well.
When you say fifth time scaling up.
5th time we've scaled it up.
Yeah.
Sorry. And so we're at a technology readiness level of 7 going to 8. So it's a very advanced technology readiness. Now in front of that is a number of commercial projects that we've spoken about. We've struck deals in North America, in Asia, and in Europe. In North America, we're working with a group called Fortis BC. Think of them as the equivalent of Origin Energy in Australia. Massive gas utility, tens of billions of dollars in scale. LNG, pipeline gas, renewables, and just a broad network of pipelines across Canada. They've picked our technology up. We've been working with them for 2 years. The project's going very well. Site selection, and the project engineering is very well advanced. So we're in a state now that we're driving towards an investment decision this year to enable that project to go forward for 2026, 2027 startup.
Just on these projects, with Fortis and others, is the CDP critical, in terms of the scale up that you've just done? Was that critical to give a big tick in terms of investment decisions going forward on those sort of projects, or is it more specific to their projects?
Yes and no. I mean, we've been walking and chewing gum at the same time, so we've kind of been heading down the path of getting the technology ready for commercial deployment, which is lots of technology stuff. But at the same time, we've had so much demand for the tech that we had no choice but to get into the commercial dialogue, because we want to be first movers in the industry, so to speak. So we've been kind of doing both at the same time, running and building. which has paid dividends because we're kind of ahead of the game in big markets like Asia, where there's a massive market for us, as well as North America and in Europe. So the CDP is of course it's important because I think for the fifth time people want to see and customers want to see the technology working at industrial scales. And it's going to prove to do that. So we're now taking the learnings from all that and leveraging that into the projects that we're currently building and into the design and the engineering side. So it wasn't a gating item to say, well, we're going to do it. It was a gating item to say how we're going to adopt the learnings from that into the projects that we're currently pursuing. So we're ahead of the game on the commercial side, feeding in the learnings as we move along, and that's what we've got to do.
Yeah,
we're moving fast at pace. We've got support to do that. In Canada, we've had the very strong support of the Canadian government, up to the tune of $8 million of grant funding that gets the project through to an FID. In Australia, we've also got Australian government support, and I'd expect that's going to continue in Japan and in France as well. So, there's a really strong infrastructure and support network around, building out the tech globally.
And in terms of the actual commercialisation from a numbers perspective, how does that sort of look? I mean, obviously it differs by project, but what does a sort of typical project, the run-of-the-mill, look like for Hazer from a revenue or sort of bottom line standpoint, depending on the production size?
Well, this is where it gets really exciting for us, because if we look at the actual projects themselves, they're heavily economic robustly economic because of our low cost position. So the margins are big, and they throw off a lot of cash for the customer, which from our perspective is positive because we're a licensed model. We don't take capital risk. All of our capital is spent in the past. So we're going to get early access to free cash as projects come online through a license and a royalty model, which is not dissimilar to a lot of technology companies. So if you think about a typical plant for us at commercial scale could throw off over its life cycle around 100 million Aussie over 20 years in NPV. So you can quickly see how big our platform could be at scale. And we have a vision of having 10 plants in 10 years. If you add all that up and you've got $80 to $100 million coming off a plant over a life cycle, then you can very quickly see that the size of the prize for Hazer could be close to $1 billion or more as we build out the portfolio. You might say, well, what does 10 plants look like? Well, actually, if we're successful in that, which we're confident we will be, it's half of the 0.5% of the global demand of hydrogen today.
So you're not solving any sort of problem by doing 10 of them.
We'd love to have more.
It's not even touching the sides.
So it's just to give your listeners kind of
perspective.
A perspective on how big that is. It's less than 1% of today's global market, which is our disruption. So we're shooting for the covers. 10 in 10 is got a nice sound to it, but there's a real science behind it. We've got 3 in the bag already. We've got a pipeline of, I can tell you now, over 20 commercial conversations prior to the CDP coming online. I'd expect that to multiply as we go through the next 6 to 12 months. And
you talked earlier about the learnings and whatnot. Can you, obviously, prior to your time and without any sort of disrespect, but every startup, particularly in the sort of clean tech, clean energy platform like this, there's going to be learnings and there's going to be mistakes. What do you sort of see the things that the company did wrong in the past, and how have you sort of right the ship from there?
So absolutely, look, it's full credit to everybody that's been on this platform from day one. I think it's a privilege to be here running it, given what's gone on. As you said, no technology venture. You can look at all of them. They start in a garage and they end up in an office, but they've all had bumpy starts to them. And it's never been a straight line. Even as we go back kind of 2 years ago, I'd literally signed my employment contract to join the firm, and I got a call from the board and they said, well, we've got an announcement coming out tomorrow. We've had some issues with the materials that we were using, not the tech, more the materials. And I went, oh damn, what's that mean? I just literally signed up here, and I kind of read the announcement, and go, oh God, what have I got myself into?
Hospital handball.
Hot potato. But it turned out to be a materials issue, not the tech. So when you kind of dig into it, what were the learnings? I think we probably could have been slightly better at the way we thought about the decision making for using suppliers and so forth.
Yep.
But it's a double-edged sword, this, right? You're
trying to go hard and fast.
But at the same time, you're cap in hand looking for cash to grow the business. So you make decisions on the fly. And that's what, you've got to take that risk to get to where we are. If we hadn't have done that, we wouldn't be here today. We pivoted from those decisions. We and got ourselves back on track, and we basically set ourselves the milestone of getting the CDP from that point to production January this year, and we achieved it. And how can you do that? Well, it's about building the right team around it. You can't do it without the team. The right attitude, behaviours, the right vision, and the strategy
and
for
alignment.
The firm. You have to have it. Otherwise, everyone's going to pull in the wrong direction. And we spent a lot of time building the team, bringing on the right people. And you can't achieve the dream without the team. And that's what we've kind of got at the moment. We're 25 people, going to probably 30.
Still a small
Still
team.
small.
Yeah,
and that's when we're juggling a lot of stuff, but we're trying to keep the cost down at the same time as grow. But the team, I can't underestimate how important it is to have the right skills, the right dynamic, the right leadership, attitude, behaviour, and energy, drive, and enthusiasm to kind of align and get the company to where it needs to be.
No, for sure. And just we talked a little bit about markets, but you look at Middle East. I think that'd have to be one of, if not the cheapest gas producer. How does that sort of look like in terms of rolling out a Hazer into some of the Gulf states?
The Middle East is coming to the top of our list.
Yeah.
We set out target markets of North America, Europe, Asia. I think we can demonstrate today that we've got a project in each of those, and there's multiple dialogues going on in all those markets today. But then you go and you look at, well, where is it best to deploy our technology? Well, where you've got cheap feedstock, arguably leading to fairly cheap power and energy. You've got big industrial complexes that need decarbonisation. You've got a supportive policy in government and access to capital. They're the top 5-6 things that we look at in terms of market assessment. And the Middle East ticks all of those boxes. But it's a market that's still evolving. But I think talking to a number of stakeholders in the Middle East, we get a real sense that there's a willingness to do something around that from a capital perspective as well as a project level perspective. And I can see us having a major presence in the Middle East, and I think with the right support there and the right projects and stakeholder support, I'm pretty confident that over the next 12 months we're going to have a decent presence in the Middle East.
Because it basically, as you sort of say, transitions. They're huge gas producers, which is obviously fossil fuel not that friendly.
Yeah.
It turns them from a fossil fuel huge generator to actually making the world a better place in terms of still fueling their economies and whatnot with energy, but with a much better way.
I absolutely agree with you. They've got all the right dynamics to make it happen. I think the willingness is there, and they've got the gas, and they are serious about decarbonising. I know they're big fossil fuel players, but they're playing their role. And the conversations I've had really encourage me that we're going to be dealing with stakeholders that are prepared to take the punt, and the leap of faith, and back the technology. There's not many of us can do that. That can take a natural gas product and convert it into hydrogen at the scale and the pace that we can do it. So I think that we're going to see some real projects coming out of that.
And watch that space.
Yeah.
And just in terms of you zeroing back on you, and it's there's no iron team and all of that sort of stuff. But when you sort of look back across your career, you obviously had this is your third CEO role. How do you sort of see that you've changed? Whether it's because it's a smaller team, it's different cultures and whatnot. How do you sort of see that you've evolved as a leader? And what's your sort of hunger and drive being in a smaller company where you can have much more impact, A, in terms of employees, but B, obviously stakeholders and ultimately the share price.
Totally. Well, I think if I look back on my executive career as a CEO, I would have, if I could rewind, I'd probably do my first role a lot differently. The first one was in China, really difficult stakeholder, complex issues that we were dealing with on the ground. And I probably took a lot of it very personally, and that's just me a little bit. But fast forward through all that, I've learned a lot about myself as an individual, as a leader, and what it really takes to kind of get and build a high-performing team. And I've really come back to the strength of leadership and the strength of the people that you bring on board, and that, and setting a very strong strategy and vision for what you're trying to achieve. It's very easy in these roles to kind of get into the minutiae of the detail and not lift out and say, well, what are we actually trying to achieve with this vehicle and this platform to achieve success? And translating that into what we've achieved over the last, I would say, 18 months, and it's a testament to the past, by the way.
Yeah.
But if I look at what it takes to turn something around and get and rally behind a vision, you can achieve outstanding results with the team. And we're always checking in on the ground in the company. It's never easy. By the way, there's always natural tension between engineers and a business.
Yeah, which is probably healthy.
Which is normal. It's healthy.
Yeah.
But we've set out to turn a research division and a company into a business and a commercial platform, and it's not easy because you've got to deliver a technology that is ultimately going to guarantee an output for a customer, but you've got to drive the value of it. And so we're on the right path. There's great learnings from the past. Leadership, for me, vision, strategy are absolute ingredients to the success of any organisation.
And you talk about the path. Can you just finish maybe on what the vision? Where's Hazer in 3 to 5 years? Are there projects rolled out? Are you still scaling up the CDP? What does it sort of look like?
Fast forward 3 years, I think this will be a $1 billion platform. Based on what I see. How? We have a extremely competitive technology that has got very strong global interest already. And I know we're going to be one of the lowest cost producers of hydrogen worldwide, using natural gas as a feedstock and a graphite co-product. I think we'll have a disruption in refining for our technology to be deployed in that particular sector, which is the existing market today. I think the graphite market will go off. You've seen the recent supply restrictions coming out of China. They supply the world with over 70% of the world's supply. We are a future large producer of graphite into that market, so we've got 2 prongs to the diversified earnings, if you like. And I think we will have at least 10 projects in the pipeline because I can see what we've got in front of us. I'm confident that we will have a licensing arrangement around the company that helps us deploy this technology at pace.
Scale. Yeah,
and we won't be able to do it without that sort of thing, but we've got multiple discussions underway to kind of achieve that. We're a small company trying to do big things in big markets with big players, and you can only do it with the strongest of partners.
We love hearing and seeing Aussie battlers, Aussie tech companies trying to change the world and make the world a cleaner place. Well done, Glenn, and looking forward to watching in the future.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Simon. Brilliant.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.